upfront. PGI are at 10. Their mini plenary is also starting at 10. You know, I sometimes get a bit frustrated when institutions which are supposed to give us an overview of how they intend to turn the situation around. Yeah, it's okay to lament about challenges, but for example, I agree with my colleague. What you'd expect is to get a performance dashboard of some kind that gives you an indication as to which municipalities, for example, even if when it comes to grants, are underspending, and what are the reasons. Lump them together into that when it comes to that dashboard, so that you get a sense of progress, that the progress that is being made, or the interventions that are being made to try and address some of the challenges. That also speaks to issues where, for example, Salga says economics aligned have not provided clarity on the role. It's in the slide, the role that government, local government, should play to try and achieve inclusive growth. But you'd think that in line with their mandate, the Salga is there to promote and protect the interests of local government, rather than to look at this thing after the decision has been made or after the strategy has actually been outlined. Were they not supposed then to lobby upfront to say, let's clarify the role of Salga, rather local government, as to what role local government should play in trying to ensure this inclusive growth and to try and reignite it? Because economic activity does not happen. There's no one who resides or stays at a province or national level. Economic activity happens at local government level, in municipalities, because businesses are located in municipalities. So that means you can't try to reignite growth in South Africa without addressing that shortcoming. If the municipalities are dysfunctional, we are going to continue to talk in abstract terms or even set targets of economic growth that you really cannot achieve. So I would have expected that instead of them highlighting that one of the issues that is discussed is a clear proposal. I think this has already been mentioned about what role then local government can play and what contribution they can try to make towards the achievement of that inclusive growth and setting realistic targets that can be achieved. The other issue is with respect indeed with the unfunded mandates, but that point has been well made earlier. It's this question of expenditure grants and the non-performance. It's difficult. It's the same with the question I asked to the Minister of COCTA yesterday, Chair. The point is, if we talk about municipalities that have no revenue-raising capacity, which is a valid point, that quite a number of municipalities have no revenue-raising capacity on the one hand, but the very same municipalities continue to try and get services provided by businesses, and they do not pay them because they do not have the finances to be able to do so. And that naturally then has an impact on local business activity. And the ripple effect of that is, if people provide services and they're not being paid for, then it's a vicious cycle where then services that, if they don't pay service providers for services rendered, those people will then not have money to be able to pay for municipal services, for example, the basic water and other issues. That includes the workers who work for those companies that are never actually paid on time by the very same municipalities. The point is, if we have an understanding of the extent of the problem, because some of the municipalities like the metros have revenue-raising capacity. Most of the municipalities that are in rural communities have no revenue-raising capacity, but they do actually tender for specific services, issue tenders, and people tender, win the tender, they provide the service, they're not paid. So the ripple effect of that is that naturally then collapses the local economy at that municipality. Up until we have an understanding of the performance dashboard I mentioned earlier again, the expenditure on grants, what is the issue, who are the offenders, who are underspending, the issue about municipalities that have revenue-raising capacity, how well are they doing insofar as being able to pay service providers on time, and also do an analysis when it comes to other municipalities that have no revenue-raising capacity, and look at the issues and the contributing factors so that when we make proposals about what kind of funding model is required for municipalities, we talk about something that we have in black and white, so that we're clear, because now it would not be clear as to what kind of support is required, even in those municipalities that have limited or either no revenue raising capacity. My view is, to a large extent, yes, there's a problem of there's a problem where municipalities are underfunded, but there's also a problem of complete mismanagement of the little resources that are channeled to municipalities, where there's no value for monies that government has channeled to municipalities. Now, it makes it difficult up until, let me put it this way, up until all those shortcomings have been addressed, it makes it difficult for anyone to advocate for more money, because we'll be simply throwing money at the problem rather than seeking to address the underlying root causes of the problem. And I feel like what the discussion that we should have is one that says, what are these deep-seated challenges that municipalities face? What kind of plans can be put in place in order to address them? And then where is additional funding required so that this is not done haphazardly? What happened now? Is the chairperson still there?
No. We can still hear you, Honorable Kwankwa. If you can wrap the questions, if you can. It's your own internet that is creating your problems.
I beg your pardon, Chair. Grant me atonement. And that then should be linked to the 4% decline they spoke about in grant funding. I'm sure there must be a direct correlation between the performance of municipalities insofar as that is concerned, as well as the 4% decline. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Kwankwa. There isn't any further questions from the platform, so suffice to say, if I could just place a few. One is, given the committee's consistent theme about economic development at local level, I want to understand your position on how we can perhaps stimulate part of the township economy. Because I think the point is made, no one lives national, everyone lives local. Therefore, I would want to understand what Salga's enhancement of that, because at this point in time, you are correct. If I take your research into cognizance, that says, the assumption that says that revenue will be at 90% for local government, as per the white paper, that at this point in time it's sitting at 60%. Therefore, it asks the corollary question, which is to say, how do we stimulate inactive economic sectors so that they are serious contributors to the municipal fiscus? And in part, I think the township economy is one aspect that has been poorly tapped into. And perhaps I'd like to just maybe as a question, what Salga's position, given the recent events that have taken place with spaza shops, the conversation about immigrants and migrants. I'm not always certain that that's a direction. I think it's scapegoating in some ways. I think there must be a regulatory framework about how we manage township economies broadly, rather than making it an immigration issue. Let's make it an economic issue, because also we tend to assume that the township economy is only spaza shops. In truth, there are no immigrants that I know of that run undertakers, as an argument, and yet there are funerals all the time. There's no immigrant that I know that is running tents, catering at funerals, backyard dwelling, as an economic enabler. I'm just looking at the value chain. I sometimes think that we narrowly say, it's the spaza shops that are run by Somalians that are in the townships. It's not. It's not exclusively so, is the point I'm trying to make. And therefore, what is local government's view on that? Because as far as revenue generating, when you look at a metro like Johannesburg, it is always going to be the case. So I'm not sure, going down the line of the 5,400 as it pertains to the median wage is but one component, but the other broader component must speak to the fact that as economic activity happens, local government everywhere in the world, if I was having this conversation in Berlin as an argument, I would make the case that Berlin is heavily taxed relative to what happens in another municipality because it has cross-subsidization mechanisms, right? And therefore, naturally in Johannesburg, Sandton is going to be taxed relative to Alexander, so as to cross-subsidize. It is the South African, if you like, moral contract. So what I'm trying to figure out from Salga's position, what are the economic stimulus that help economic hubs so as to create an improving tax revenue on that basis? And whether as part of the submission to the white paper, should there be no further localized taxes that can be levied as part of the insights that go? I mean, municipal rates and taxes are part one. Are there any additional ones that can come from local government? The second question is, I think it's a welcome defect, and I don't want to defend the Minister of Finance in this regard, but you know, the famous statement is that municipalities are not levied on debt. So the national sphere of government and the national appropriation is leveraged on debt. We service the debt. Local governments don't. And if we were to do a 10% proportionality of servicing of debt to local government, that would change the municipal fiscus. So I do think there's a component of that we mustn't. I agree with you that local government, national government can appropriate more to local government. There's a dynamic about that, but I think clearly when there's a conversation about debt, we ought to be careful because you're not going to be able to leverage debt. But given that question, I want to understand the metros in terms of their own rating and in terms of municipal bonds that have been issued out. I know Johannesburg has had a few out, and therefore, what is the state of the debt management instruments around that? Given that some of the metros, Cape Town as an example, might have a higher rating. It can't be rated higher than the sovereign, but I want to understand how they are managing their debt profile. Then the last issue is, I can't help but ask, two of the largest metros, or at least three in Gauteng, the three largest metros in Gauteng, are all plagued by a revolving door of mayors. Now that is an inherently political question, but I think as it speaks to the fiscus, it doesn't bode well for localized investment. Because if you don't know who the mayor is going to be next month, how do you invest in that municipality? So I want to understand whether Salga feels there should be thinking around how we make submissions into coalition management, particularly heading towards a local government election, but also as it speaks to capacitation of political parties, because I've always held the view that you can have a coalition with a party that's small but doesn't have an economic plan, but then they become MEC for something or another, or MMC for something or another. They don't have a plan, and therefore naturally you end up with incapacitated councillors managing significant budgets. As a metro like Johannesburg, I think if I'm looking at Joburg's budget, is 70 billion rand, somewhere there. So you can appreciate that if I send somebody there who has zero skill at managing 70 billion rands, it could be 70 billion rands that, as Honorable Lekhanyan so aptly put it, geld after geld in die water, of money after bad. Geld in die waterfall. So I'm fascinated to hear whether Salga is making a submission to that process, because let's be fair, on the large metros, there's been profound instability. And I can assure you, that instability has led, yes, you might say there's underfunding in infrastructure build, but let's not deny the fact that when, I don't want to go into Rooival, but I can assure you, where there's multiple administrations, you are not going to manage that infrastructure properly. And the water boards, and the list goes on. Kelvin as a power plant, the list goes on. I speak because I come from Gauteng, so I can't think about KZN or whatever. I'm just merely alluding to the instability of the politics as it leads to fiscal mismanagement, and whether Salga has a view on that particular point. Let me...
Sorry, I'm doing this, Chair. I don't mean to speak after you. It is a very pertinent matter that one of us addressed, which I felt Salga should speak.
I will give you a 30-second indulgence.
I'll need 10 seconds.
Okay.
The matter pension fund contributions not paid by municipalities. As we speak now, they are engaging on a matter. It seems to me there's about 6 billion rand not paid over to pension funds on behalf of insurance by municipalities. This is a massive problem, especially on the two-part system that we agreed on. People can't get their contributions. Please.
Sure.
Need answers on that.
Thank you. Let me allow you, I mean, you are responding to multiple questions, so if we can keep it brief, because we've still got 3 other presentations that are coming straight after this and 1 online. So I don't want to, this is an important, that's why I gave you exclusive time. Please, after you.
All right, thank you very much, Honorable Chairperson. Yeah, it's on. I will actually allow Lerato as the presenter to do most of the questions, but I would like to speak to the one of Randwest City Local Municipality where I come from, where we are the first municipality to receive the debt relief of ESCOM. And it is mainly through the support that we got from Salga to ensure that we are capacitated in terms of the submissions and to look at the requirements that we were given. And as a municipality, through the collection that we have made, we have ensured that we are able to keep up with the monthly installments that we agreed upon, and on that note, we are doing well. But what is most important is what we have done as Salga Gauteng in terms of the Municipal Audit Awards, where municipalities are looking at how they perform and how they are looking at the issues of the Municipal Finance Management Act. So if they are adhering to that and they set best practices there, we copy from that as municipalities, and we do award them for providing excellent service to the communities that we are serving, and that it's actually assisting our own municipalities to perform. But also we are looking at the issues of leadership, like you have alluded to say, the chop and changing of the leadership. It's destabilizing the municipality, and mostly we are trying to ensure that we are adhering to the non-policy documents that we are having as a coalition government. And mostly I'd speak to the municipality that I'm coming from, where it's one of the stable municipalities in terms of the coalitions that we are having. And we know that we are there to serve the people. It's not about us anymore as politicians, but to ensure that we practice, or we do good to the best of our communities. And Salga, it's definitely helping us on those particular issues, and it's giving proper support, and I thank you. Sure.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it was quite a loaded questions, but I'll try and address as best as I can. The unfunded mandates, 25 billion rand is being incurred by local government. We have made a submission to DCOC that the powers and functions needs to be addressed. And they did elaborate that we got an indication that committee will be resuscitated, because we believe that the money should follow the powers and the function. That is our standing rule. In terms of ESCOM billing and debt, the issues are multiple, Chair. There is the issue of NERSA, which is giving ESCOM more than what municipalities can give their customers in terms of tariff increases. That is a challenge. The issue that you've raised, Honourable Member, of we don't have the numbers in terms of the debt, the theft, what is costing. What we know is in terms of the AG, the distribution losses that are being carried are above the norm. Chair, so what we, within that regard, we are part of the MDRC that's looking at the debt relief program. We have put measures in place, and there's been 14 municipalities that we have done an analysis that they will not meet the conditions. It will take them, we couldn't even determine the years that they'll come to a financial, be able to pay off their creditors. And we have come up with proposals, which I cannot make mention of once we discuss with ESCOM next week with regards to that. But we are working on it. We are bringing water because we have seen that water is also a problem. There will be a debt relief program for water. And we have put support package for municipalities to assist. As you can see, Rand West is one of them. The 7 municipalities that now have been allocated with the smart meter grant. And we believe with that smart meter grant, the smart meters coming in, it's revenue that could immediately be generated from there. Our view with the local government, we are part of the committee, but one of the fundamentals is the assumptions needs to be data, be driven by data, relevant data, current data, and it needs to also be reviewed after every 10 years at least, because there's economic changes, there's quite a lot of changes that happens, and if a policy takes long, then the problems get affected for it. And the issues that we are raising in terms of our mandate is to lobby and advocate capacity building, advisory, research, and we've got programs that are aligned to our mandate. We report, Chair, to one of the committees in terms of our performance and our annual performance plan. And there it shows the various programs. We've got multidisciplinary programs where municipal audit support, we've got a municipal audit support program. Out of those, we had, due to our constrained financial standing as well, we were only able to assist 9 municipalities last year. And out of the 9 municipalities, 46% of the findings were reduced. And 3 municipalities improved in terms of their outcomes. And we have made a submission to National Treasury and DCOC. Yesterday we were in the interministerial task team. We were given the tasks to start running the program because we believe that together we can replicate it, and there's going to be more impact and more efforts coming from one government, not just local government, in addressing that problem. And we believe there's also capacity building programs that we have. We've just recently done supply chain, executive supply chain management in collaboration with National Treasury for councillors because of the fruitless and wasteful expenditure that is not being dealt with, and capacitating our Section 78 committees into how we address it. We also are seeing that investigations are a problem. So we want to start engaging SIU to come and help us to say what are the best approaches in terms of investigations that we can do, because we're lacking that skill, and it's part of the roles that we're supposed to do in terms of investigating what happened with that fruitless and wasteful expenditures. In terms of the LED, or maybe let me just go in terms of some of the we have made inputs in terms of the NDP, Honorable Chair. We believe that we've got a program within Salga, local development and economic growth. And part of the issues that we are looking into is small town regeneration program. It's been running for 3 years now. It is between the nodes of Eastern Cape, Western Cape, and Northern Cape. And it has been making progress. We are at the point where there's been identified actions that needs to be done. We are part of the committee that looks into how those programs are going to be funded. We're looking into the issues. We've got a program that looks into the ocean economy, within how municipalities can enhance the economic development in those nodes where there is ocean economy. We're also looking into how municipalities can develop local development strategies, because majority of the municipalities don't have that. And we believe that in them having the strategies, they'll be able to come up with actions that will be able to, because local government's role mainly is to enhance the environment, to make the environment to be conducive for business to come and invest and also thrive within those municipalities. And we believe that if there is those strategies in place, and also ease of doing business within municipalities. Yesterday, actually, on the plane when I was coming, one of the business guy, the guy I was standing, he was saying it takes long for municipalities to approve our plans that are supposed to, they're building fruit and veg, and it's costing them money. So these are some of the issues that we are saying. The turnaround times in terms of approvals of business related issues needs to be done in a very efficient, and it doesn't take long as well. So in terms of DDM, Honorable Member, we have made indications, particularly with the issue of underspending. We were in Mpumalanga with our NEC. Ngangala district is doing very well within that area. To say when municipalities don't have the right capacity, get the districts to come and assist so that the money still gets to the intended beneficiaries. Because the need does not go away because the municipality does not spend. And if the districts, there's no capacity, the provinces are there. So that the money still gets contained within the province and within for the intended beneficiaries, Chair. So we believe district model, particularly also in making sure, especially on the inefficiencies, to say, how do we achieve economies of scale in terms of the services, external services that we are getting as municipalities, to say, if we negotiate a contract, let's say for ICT, for the entire municipalities, as opposed to there could be economies of scale and savings that could be made as part of those programs, Chair. In terms of the deteriorating state of local government, we believe the issues are complex, Chair. There's policy issues that are not enabling local government to do its mandate. Fiscal framework is one of them. That's why we're asking that it be reviewed. There's internal things that local government needs to do, like governance, get the governance right, get the finances right, get the service delivery right. And we at Salga, we've got those programs to say, like I said, that within those areas, to bring in the capacity that is fit for purpose. We ran a program where municipalities are not necessarily consulting fees that the AGS has raised. We ran a program to capacitate officials within the municipalities to be able to compile financial statements on their own, because they actually outsource that service. So those are some of the issues to say, if we capacitate them, they will be able to do it internally and maybe require just a review part from consultants, which doesn't require a lot of time and it doesn't cost a lot of money. And there is socio-economic issues that requires everyone, communities, because we've seen that vandalism is also contributing towards the infrastructure challenges that we have. So it's those dynamics, the policy issues, the socio-economic issues that needs everyone to work collaboratively together to address the problems, and the municipalities. And we have advocated, and also when we discuss with the AG, that performance management, AG will assist our councillors with consequence management issues to say, how do you address it? How do we put in a frame or a guide for municipalities to deal with the consequence management issue? And also to say, we want the lower levels of municipalities to also have performance management contracts, because it's only at the senior level, and we believe that for municipality to work, it takes all the staff members within municipalities. In terms of the salary wage, one of the key issues that we have done with the negotiations that was just concluded, we made financial viability and sustainability a key factor of the negotiations. We said municipalities that are under distress should be exempted from implementing the increases, as it will further put them in a worse off situation, Chair. And we also made sure that within the negotiation was going to do an agreement of 5 years, so there's also stability within those areas. And we've also put that performance management should be part of the agreements that is there. It's still going to take a process because then the lower levels, there's consultations with the unions that needs to be held at the chair. Preventing fraud and corruption. Chair, one of our role as Salga is we don't necessarily have executive powers over municipalities, but they are our members. So we need to make sure that we guide them in terms of fraud and corruption. There is a program that we run within our governance program that helps municipalities put in place systems, preventative systems, to identify fraud and corruption early on. And also within their risk management to have those anonymous hotlines where people can report suspected fraud and corruption. And that is also investigated, not just reported. And so those are some of the programs in terms of dealing with fraud and corruption. The coalition chair. Salga was one of the first organizations when the first coalitions came in, where we put up a framework that seeks to bring some stability in municipalities. That framework is there. It's a framework that we can even submit to government to have a look that it can be adopted as a blueprint that can be adopted. The state of local government finances that was done by cities has a cities network has shown that coalitions have contributed to where the cities are. And it has obviously had replica effects as we are seeing right now. In terms of the localized text, Chair, we have not really have not done a study yet in terms of that, but we are aware of the study that FFC has done in terms of alternative revenues that could be explored within local government. But I think after we have finalized the local government white paper and the affordability study, then we'll look into this issue, Chair. Pension funds. Unfortunately, I don't have an answer for that one, but we have strongly, spoken to our members that this is not acceptable, as it's mandatory to pay those pension funds before we can even pay other creditors. So we don't have a program, but we have discussed through our provincial colleagues in terms of how municipalities could deal with this issue. I think, Chair, I've tried to summarize a lot. Yeah, it was quite a lot.
Yeah, no, there has been a lot.
Yeah.
What I would like to request is that, given that these are public hearings on the division of revenue, that the presentation you've sent does touch on many of the macroeconomic legislative processes. This is an annual process, noting the fact that we also go into the budget in February that is tabled for the next financial year. So perhaps maybe it may be helpful, particularly for Salga, to be able to go, what are the key components that need to be adjusted for, so that at least for the next time we connect, all the other issues don't fall within the mandate of the committee. So in other words, the review of the white paper, we'll make the recommendation. That's not the debate. But in truth, narrowly on the division of revenue, that is a unique and a specific conversation that needs to be able to look at it and say, these are the aspects that are in the budget that need adjustment. I get the broader argument that 10% in terms of revenue allocation to local government is insufficient. You don't have to further convince me on that point. But I want to understand what adjustments can be made so that we make the submissions consistent with that. Can I park it there and ask, even if you send a supplementary note, that will be helpful in that regard.
Okay.
I'm going to move with speed. If you can remain there, I want to take the next presentations. Honorable Khanya.
On what you have said, Chair, I think we may not have to do it for the MTBBS, but also for the main appropriations which are coming within the framework that the chairperson has outlined. If next time when you come here, we may not have to ask you questions for you to explain the things that you are explaining. They must be in your presentation. And there must be, we must be one as government. When you talk about township regeneration, the minister in February was here. He spoke about there were identified municipalities or towns, Hammaskral, and so on and so forth. Those things are not being spoken of in your township economic regeneration. And I was also interested to hear you saying something about Operation Vulindle. We are one government. The president came here and said we have introduced reforms which will enhance economic growth, but we don't talk about that at local government. So next time when you come here asking for money, we will want to hear you very loudly speaking about the application of those reforms in specific localities. If it is in the energy hub, you say in the Northern Cape, this is what is being introduced. If it's in the logistics sector, you say in eThekwini, in Cape Town, this is what is going to happen, and that is why we need money. Thank you so much.
So just to answer on what you were saying.
No, if you can respond in a written form.
Yeah, written form. Okay,
Please.
we'll do that.
If you start now, we are going to enter into a new discussion.
Sure, no problem.
And we have 3 new presentations still to come.
Sure, no problem.
So if I can, given those requests, because it will be helpful that we talk rands and cents. Let me allow Cosatu to then proceed. Honorable, say your presentation. If we can swap seats, because it's easier if the presenter sits closer to the front.
So you allow the chairman to relegate you to a one. We said you must eat when you are ready.
Let me allow you to proceed, sir. You will have same policy we've read, so you've got 20 minutes. Have a go.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, members, colleagues. My name is Matthew Parks from Cosatu. So I think we just want to appreciate, Chair, that always giving us space as Cosatu just to raise the kind of concerns of workers in provincial and local government. And I think we can say, Chair, there's a lot of concerns in local government, to put it politely. But I think also what are our proposals to the 7th Parliament. Chair, we've covered a few issues outside of the DoRAB bill, but mostly as appendixes as well, just for members' benefit, because it's always difficult to have a clean, complete separation when these issues spill over. But look, I think in a nutshell, Chair, we really hoped with the MTBS, with the DoRAB bill, given our socio-economic crises, I think it's the best way to describe them, a bit more of an aggressive approach about stimulating the economy,
rebuilding the state, and again, we know local government is one of the weakest links, how to grow the economy, and again, our unemployment rate is our number one national crisis. If you don't resolve that, everything else we're doing is just dancing on the side. And of course, how do we tackle crime, corruption, etc. I think we really felt that government took a business as usual approach, and we had really hoped, given our many, many crises, a much more aggressive approach towards NCOP, even towards DoRAB as well. We didn't really see many new measures about how we're going to grow an economy. And Chair, it's fine that we're used to this thing. We're used to an unemployment rate of 40%. But it just takes one spark, like we saw in North Africa, where a policeman harassed a fruit hawker. Tunisia imploded. We saw in July 2021, Chair, the violence in KZN and Gauteng, that we don't have limitless time. And society is frustrated, is despondent on so many fronts. And government needs to be really be seen to be driving the economy, to fixing the state. So we were honestly, Chair, as organised labour, as Cosatu, quite underwhelmed by the budget. We're not saying that we must print money, but we think there's smarter things that we can do. And we do think at times, Chair, throughout the budget, even cascading to the DoRAB bills, etc., there's a fixation that if we reduce the wage bill, somehow everything else will be sorted out. If we reduce the wage bill to cut the debt, things will be okay. And we've done that approach for quite a few years, Chair. We still remain in a crisis. So, Chair, as Labour, we always have to say, what is our fundamental crisis? Well, and notwithstanding the good news we received, I think was it on Tuesday from the stats that say about the unemployment figures, we have a 41.9% unemployment rate. We shouldn't be complacent when 4 out of 10 South Africans, 7 out of 10 young people can't find work. But look, Tuesday's stats, Chair, was good news, given the previous 3 quarters we had unemployment increasing. But again, Chair, such a high unemployment rate should give all of us sleepless nights. And if you look at the MTPS overall, I think to your point, Chair, about growing the economy, it projects a 1.7% growth rate for the next 3 to 4 years. That's not going to absorb new matriculates, it's not going to reduce unemployment, it's not going to generate the tax revenue the state requires to fund public or municipal services. What it will do is to see poverty and inequality being entrenched. And Chair, we've seen many municipalities, the number of dysfunctional ones, of a polite way of putting it, really struggling to provide the most basic services of sanitation, of roads, water, etc. We've seen many public services really struggling with high numbers of vacancies to provide public services. We know the situation of the SOEs are slightly out of the DoRAB bill. And of course, crime and corruption remains a national pastime. And again, aging infrastructure also is a huge crisis. Chair, I think just, on an ideological perspective, as Cosatu, without going into too much, but just to say we oppose the approach of simply thinking that if we slash the expenditure, reduce the debts, that the economy will grow. I think we take a slightly different approach. We should be growing the economy, enabling businesses to operate, creating jobs, rebuilding the capacity of the state. And because those things, the public municipal services are what companies require to grow. And again, we need a much more aggressive approach to growing the economy. And Chair, this is an approach we've been trying for, I think, since Honourable Sophie Lekhanyani was still in Limpopo. So there's that old debates. And we're still in the same crisis, Chair. But we're not saying that we need to be reckless.
So, I don't want to have it backwards and forwards with you while you present out. Is the opening point correct when you say your post-treasury's focus? I get the expenditure part. Do you say focus on slashing debt? You oppose?
We oppose slashing expenditure and then focusing on reducing debt. So our ideological point, Chair, is that we don't disagree with reducing debt. Any sober person wants to reduce debt, but it's how you do it. And so our approach is that if you grow the economy, businesses have company taxes to pay the state. If you reduce unemployment, workers have jobs to pay income tax, VAT, etc., to buy the goods businesses produce. If you do those things, you increase tax revenue, then the state has the money to fund public services, which businesses, society requires. And of course, also that then enables the state to reduce the debt, but on a sustainable trajectory. So, for example, Chair, you could simply say, and it's an easy administrative thing, cut the debt, pay teachers 50% of the salary, but you're not growing the economy. You'll have to cut the debt again next year, the wage bill again next year, And so it's a vicious cycle to the death, so to speak. And look, we're not saying we need to be reckless. We want to, we do want to avoid the experience of other African countries. But we're just saying, look what other industrial nations have done, whether it's the US, whether it's Europe, whether it's China, stimulating the economy, grow, and then you then create the revenue the state requires. So I think that's for us the fundamental issue. We know, look, the wage bill is always a big issue. And I think for us, people might say, well, it's Cosatu, of course you want more salaries for members. Sure, no, we do that. But if you look at the key macro indicators, Chair, in 94, Advent Democracy, we had about 34 million South Africans, about 1.1 million public servants. Population has doubled in that time, Chair. Public service headcount has not doubled, it's basically plateaued, about 1.2 million. There's about 70,000 vacancies across the state. And again, we see the impact of high vacancy rates upon service delivery, whether it's the issue of a nurse having to cover 2 vacancies, whether it's a home affairs where, according to the minister, it's about a 60% vacancy rate. So then we can't be surprised when public services struggle. We've seen the police headcount, for example, Chair, and I know it's out of the DoRAB bill, but just to give an example, it's declined by 15%, the headcount of the last decade. Population is increasing, crime is increasing. So I think our point, Chair, is that let us put the horse in front of the cart, not the cart in front of the horse, and let us feed the horse so he can pull the cart. Chair, the other issue is that people say the wage bill is out of control. So if we take the budget figures, not Cosatu's figures, budget figures, wage bill stayed about 35% of the budget from 2008 for 15 years. It actually declined in the last 2 years to 31% of the budget. So it's not growing, it's shrinking. People will say, look, public servants get paid too much, but let's break down the myth. Most public servants are nurses, it's about 100,000. Doctors is about 20,000. Police is about 178. Teachers is about 350. So if you remove the offensive title public servants and speak of the skilled professionals, and you compare what they make to people in the private sector, etc., then you see it's a different picture. And you can continue to squeeze what a nurse makes. She will then go to a better job in the private sector, with less stress, better pay, or she'll go to Dubai, Qatar. You'll see Australia's recruiting police officers. So it's a very dangerous situation. And again, you do need public warm bodies to fill public services. We had hoped, Chair, to see some sort of a resolution to the Western Cape teachers' crisis, where about 2,400 contract teachers' jobs are in danger of being cancelled. We had not seen a response. So proposals, Chair, is that, look, allowed government to engage with Labour at the PSWC, see if you can't prioritize filling critical frontline vacancies, not management vacancies, ones that actually add value. Find a solution to filling the teachers' post-crisis. And it's not just a Western Cape crisis. I think that's the other provinces are on the queue. But we do need a roadmap to rebuild, to modernize frontline public services. And if we want to reduce the headcount, we want to retire people early, let's start with public office bearers, etc. In fact, in local government, Chair, we have an abnormality. Members of Parliament have not increased since 94. It's been that 400 members at the NA, 54 in the NCOP. Every local elections, we add more councillors. So we're getting ourselves into a bit of trouble, Chair. Sorry, Chair, just on the issue of local government, I think, to be polite, the state local government is extremely concerning. It's very worrying. A decade ago, Chair, we had about 10% of municipalities in financial crisis. Today, it's about 2/3. Whichever indicator you take, those are your stats from the Treasury, from the AG, etc. We're monitoring the issue of municipalities who don't pay staff on time, and it peaked last year at about 36 municipalities. It tends to be the same culprits, but it's grown. A couple of years ago, it was about 20 municipalities. We have seen a positive thing when we engage our colleagues in SAMU and in our provinces, that it's actually decreased in this MTPS to about 12 municipalities. So that's positive progress, and we want to commend on that front. But Chair, if you look at the municipalities who don't pay staff or contribute to pension funds, it tends to be the same ones who struggle to provide basic services, tends to be the same ones who return infrastructure grants unspent to the state. So Madibeng, I think last year was amongst the worst, returning infrastructure grants unspent. But if you go to Brits, you must drive in between the potholes or just drive on the side of the road. So you can see the kind of the correlation between them. But the crisis shows that companies were closed in rural towns, and then adding to the unemployment queue, plunging very poor communities into absolute poverty. You recall, Chair, a few years ago when Clover closed the dairy plants in Frankfurt and Lichtenberg. So, Chair, there are some positive things we must commend, though. The 140 municipalities infrastructure programs, we think it's a positive intervention. We've seen some recapacity of municipalities. There were some positive indicators in terms of the infrastructure construction reports on Tuesday. And of course, about a quarter of the infrastructure program is allocated to municipalities. So if we want to see that being achieved, then we need to give more support to local government. But I think if you've seen the report by the Minister of Public Works at Parliament, I think on Tuesday, where he indicated about 3/4 of infrastructure programs are being delayed by the construction mafia interventions. So again, one can imagine local government, it's a huge crisis. At the same time, Chair, you'll find COGTA is far behind many of its own targets. So again, we need to get things right. Chair, I think we do want to commend Treasury for its interventions to assist municipalities. I think it's about 56 or something like that around the electricity debt. But we have already seen some, so I think it's about 70 municipalities, apologies. I think we've seen already some already now getting themselves back into the debt crisis. So there is a need to say, how do we really arrest this issue of debt to ESCOM? ESCOM can't be subsidizing dysfunctionality at a local government level. But I think, Chair, one can lament, as the Honourable Member said earlier about the challenges, the crisis, let's find solutions. And I think we do need a frank national discussion about what is a sustainable municipal funding model, because some municipality members are right, they don't have a rates base. Prince Albert, for example, the Western Cape. Some of them are just simply too small. We do need a frank discussion about how do we get towards the district development model. But Chair, we do want to appreciate the disaster relief funds for municipalities. It's about almost 700 million rand in various provinces. I think the allocations to improving municipal systems, we do want to support it and hope it has a positive impact. But we are concerned, Chair, about some cuts, and I think Salga had also mentioned it, about 300 million rand for transport to Nelson Mandela Bay in Joburg. The bulk infrastructure cut to Drakenstein, about 225 million rand. There might be very well legitimate explanation that maybe perhaps the municipalities couldn't spend the money in time, but one would hope there was some sort of explanation. Chair, we have been focusing with the previous Parliament around the issue of municipalities not paying staff on time, and we're quite pleased that it's come down by about 2/3. I think we've seen significant progress in Eastern Cape, where it's 2. Again, Chair, you look at all the municipal delivery indicators, Enoch and Gijima, Makana, tend to be in the newspaper headlines for the wrong reasons, especially in Gijima. In Mpumalanga, in Komazi, Northwest, I think we've seen a significant improvement. They tended to be at the worst affected. So we've seen Ditsobotla, Mamusa. Those tend to be in the headlines continuously for all the wrong reasons, those two municipalities. Ditsobotla is Lichtenberg side, Mamusa is Schweizer-Reneke areas. So I think those really do need special attention. Northern Cape, Chair, we've seen no progress. So out of the 12 municipalities now owing, it's about half on the Northern Cape. And you see these ones time and again. Timberlake, Chair, for example, at one stage didn't pay staff for about 12 months. That's your Hopetown, Stradenburg side. Chair, we have not mentioned Free State, and Free State also tend to be amongst the worst delinquents. We're told now they are up to date with paying salaries. That's progress. Chair, we had scheduled members as an appendix the last report we received from the Financial Sector Conduct Authority of employers, public and private, who are defaulting around pension funds. So we just lifted municipal pension funds. It's about 160 municipal pension funds. This is from the FFCA, so not Cosatu propaganda. Some of it, I think, is councillors' pension funds. Some of it, we've included all of it, because I think all of it would paint a picture of a problem. Some is to workers, and some of them, Chair, are for 213 months. Some are for 6 months. Even if half of the reports are not true, let's give the benefit of doubt. Local, it's still a crisis. So the nice thing, Chair, about the two-part of pension reform is that workers now have an incentive to go and actively check the pension funds, are the employers paying, etc., etc. But if you don't resolve it, Chair, I can imagine a worker wanting to go to retirement, find his money is not there, one can imagine he would go to the employer and it could become a very violent situation very quickly. So we do need to address it. We had a meeting, Chair, with at NEDLAC with Cogta and Salga about a month ago on this issue, and the report we got in from colleagues that side was an honest one. They're saying, look, they have no money. Either they fund roads or they pay pension funds, so they're funding roads. But that's not an acceptable response. It's an honest response, but it's not a good response. It doesn't give you a solution. And if this thing's been gone for 213 months, whichever time period, there's not a yesterday crisis. But the bottom line, Chair, is that this is fraud, it's theft, it's a criminal offence, and we are encouraging our members to go and lay charges with those employers, with those municipal managers. But besides that, Chair, that's an immediate response. You do need a fundamental solution to local government. We have reports of workers going to hospitals for treatment, and they're told your medical aid doesn't exist anymore. But again, Chair, points to a need for discussion of what is a sustainable financial path for municipalities. Chair, I just want to move a bit quickly, because I think I've taken a bit of time. Again, we see frontline public service also struggling, Chair, and there are some good interventions in the DoRAB bill, in the MTBS, to try to reinforce some departments. The disaster relief is positive, but we do see many key departments, health, cognitive, water, basic education, struggling to meet the infrastructure targets, etc. I think we've been pleasantly surprised that the rollover amount has decreased. It's about 2.9 billion rand, still a lot. But again, hopefully, interventions are assisting. But I think, Chair, to make the point in defence of public services, society, the economy requires efficient public services. They're not a nuisance to society, and efficiently run home affairs, well-paved roads, it benefits all of us. It grows the economy. We really hope to see detailed plans from government about how they're going to rebuild these front-line services, how we're going to try to avoid cutting them to the bone. But we do want to say there are positive additional allocation in DoRAB around the infrastructure damage from disasters, but also especially around school infrastructure as well. So we hope that's going to make a difference. There's a lot of effort around the Western Cape. Those are positive things. Chair, we do hope there's quite a significant allocation for school infrastructure, which that's a positive thing. We hope it's going to make some dent around the infrastructure, the sanitation crisis, because, Chair, we've been discussing that issue for 20 years. And every year we're told, this year, we're getting done. So we hope that will be resolved. There is a positive allocation, Chair, of 300 million rand to formalize the taxi industry. But I think, it's good for government to invest in industries, and the taxi industry must be supported. It's one of the few African-led industries which survived apartheid, etc. But when you give money to the taxi industry, they must also accept the responsibility of complying with our laws, be it tax law, be it labor laws, be it traffic laws, because I think we all know the crisis of the behavior there. But I think, Chair, we are quite concerned about some departments being behind the targets halfway through the year. I think we made this point. I think, Chair, look, in conclusion, there are some positive parts, but we felt overall we're not really driving the rebuilding of state, and we're not dealing with the crisis of local government. And local government is in a crisis, and if you don't fix it, then all the other efforts are not going to be resolved, Chair. So I think that's our presentation in a nutshell, Chair. The other issues we left, just as appendixes for members' benefits, the economic social relief, revenue issues, SOEs. They're also the DoRAB bill, but we know members may have appetite, so we just share that as for additional issues, Chair. So I think let me stop there, Chair, and hope we stuck to your time frame. Thanks, Chair.
Matthew, thank you very much. I appreciate it, good sir. I'm going to take the last two presentations, and then we'll take the deliberations collectively. Let me go to equal education, and if I'm not mistaken, is a joint presentation between Equal Education and Equal Education Law Center. That doesn't mean you get two bouts of 20 minutes. You can't have Kaiser Chiefs Premier League and Kaiser Chiefs Diski League. You don't get an additional 45 minutes. Wait, while you set up, let me go to the bathroom myself.
Are you on the, okay, you're on the internet.
Sorry, I was asking a question. Do you possibly have figures around the need for training?
Okay, Darren. Yeah, I've admitted you, my brother.
I'm very concerned about the selection.
Sure.
Eh? Yes. Yes. That's why. The difficulty with Labour is that when it protests, public infrastructure is broken. This is if we can't win there, we can go online. I think we're.
Yeah, I'm getting there.
You must give them permissions to share.
Oh, I thought you said I should shade for okay, Mafus. Is it Mufus? Sure.
Right, let's go. We are ready. Is the temperature in here regulated nationally, provincially, or parliamentary? Yeah. Hey, even I was starting to think. You know, yesterday in the Good Hope Chamber, it was set at Nkosi Sikeleli Africa. In here, it's set at 80 below. Van onze hemel. Over to you.
Great, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much to the members, and of course to everyone who's joined online. So I think still some of the members, I know that there were competing priorities. So just briefly, I know that we've had the privilege of being able to speak organizationally here before, but my name is Daniel Peter. I'm an attorney at the Equal Education Law Center, and I'm joined and will be co-presenting with my colleague Mahfouz, who's a researcher at Equal Education. So as you'll see, sorry for the format, but the primary purpose of this is just to give the presentation is to give some background information. So both of us, Equal Education and Equal Education Law Center, as partner organizations, are youth-led and committed to education justice, to equitable access to education, both to basic education and early childhood development. And we've had the privilege of being able to present to this council before and also to Parliament before on a number of important issues. I would like to say, of course, that the intention of us presenting today is on a very specific issue, which is what we submit is a critical underfunding of basic education and early childhood development, and that is particularly evident in the MTBPS and in the DoRAB. So to perhaps start, I will be speaking firstly about Parliament's duty to amend or revise the budget, and I certainly don't intend here to tell any of the members, to explain those duties, which I'm sure you understand better than I would. But what I do intend to do is explain why our submission is that the MTBPS, and particularly the DORA, runs the risk in its current form of undermining Parliament's duty to ensure that bills that are passed are are implemented, and secondly that there is sufficient funding for those bills. And I'll also be speaking about the underfunding of early childhood development in grade R, and my colleague will speak about a number of important other issues linked to the underfunding of education by the DORA. So again, as I mentioned, it's of course not foreign at all to the members of this council that the ultimate power to determine public spending rests fundamentally with Parliament and not with Treasury, and that includes not only oversight as to the very important notion of whether local and provincial governments and national government, of course, as well, are spending those funds correctly, but indeed also includes the duty to spend, the duty to fund legal obligations that already exist. And so, as I've mentioned, this is of course nothing new to the members of this council, but it is particularly important in our current era where we don't have any party commanding a simple majority. There's an increased public demand for enhanced oversight, and this oversight is perhaps no more important than when it extends to something as important as the potential deprivation of constitutional rights. And I'll be speaking to that in a little bit, obviously with a particular focus on basic education. So, we'll go through each of the details specifically, but overall what we're really trying to submit here is that Parliament, and specifically this council, and this committee, has an important duty to exercise its power to amend the budget, as it's currently being presented in the DoRAB, and to ensure that the DoRAB as it currently stands doesn't allow either Treasury or national departments to essentially abandon their duties. So when we first speak about unfunded mandates, and I am very grateful that one of the honourable members had actually discussed this on a local government level earlier, because although when we speak about basic education, the common understanding is that we're speaking primarily about national and provincial government, we of course know that particularly for issues like early childhood development, that is deeply implicated in local government as well. So it's an unfunded mandate that extends across. But to speak firstly about the unfunded mandate for compulsory grade R, and I perhaps would like to start there because I think we'll all be aware of the context of the Bela Act having been enacted, and despite the suspension of 2 specific clauses, the remainder of the Act is already in force and in operation. And again, as I've mentioned, both of us as organizations have presented previously, have been part of public consultations on Bela and other acts, and our intention here is not to engage in a debate about that. In fact, it's quite the opposite. It's to say that we now have an Act in place that has been passed by this Parliament and promulgated that creates very specific obligations on the state to fund the commitments and the requirements that are made pursuant to that Act. And the MTBPS, and particularly the DoRAB, is absent an indication of the state's intention to fund those commitments, and that is existing at the same time that there is potential criminal liability for parents who are not able to comply with certain provisions of that Act, and of course, most importantly from our perspective, a severe risk to the welfare of children and their ability to access an equitable education. So when we speak about the funding requirements, and we heard from an honourable member earlier about the importance of clear suggestions from civil society. Well, one of the benefits when it comes to particularly something like grade R and early childhood development is that the solutions, as it were, or the requirements have already been identified for us. In fact, in many cases, by Parliament and by the Department of Basic Education, it's been identified already that there's an infrastructural requirement just for funding grade R of 5.26 billion rand, and a further 12 billion rand for educators and an equalization of services for compulsory grade R to take effect. With the reminder, of course, that this is already part of the enacted legislation. This money has not been made available in DoRAB. In fact, it not only has not been made available and has not been spoken about, but despite several attempts during the MTBPS itself to inquire about this from Treasury explicitly, our questions and those of many of our colleagues were, unfortunately, it seems that they were ignored, but they certainly weren't answered, I can say that. And this is a significant concern, not only because, as I mentioned, there are criminal sanctions applying to parents who do not comply with the compulsory requirement to have their children enrolled in grade R, but of course because we know as well that a significant number of currently operating grade R programs are community-based and are currently registered either as partial care facilities or as part of ECD programs, and where we don't sufficiently fund the formalization or equalization of services, we run the risk of having children forced out of functioning community-based grade R programs and forced into what is, as we're all aware, an already overburdened public school system. So again, I would really just like to stress that our intention here is not to enter into a debate about the importance of grade R. What is fundamental here is that perhaps even more dangerous than any particular legislative action that can be taken is to take a legislative action and then have that power undermined by Treasury, which is not funding that mandate. We know that there's a projected 10% growth in the learner population by 2030, and that projection doesn't even include the increased enrollments because of the compulsory grade R created under Bella. And so when we're speaking about a total of more than 17 billion rand that is just entirely absent in the DoRAB, we're not speaking about something where there's a particularly complex and vexing issue to discuss, what exactly the deficit is. We know because the DBE, as has been presented in portfolio committees previously, have made these figures available, and it was requisite for the effective implementation of this act. So that's the first thing, is that grade R faces a major challenge. The second, as I mentioned, is on early childhood development. And of course, we speak about grade R as straddling those two issues, but it extends quite significantly beyond that as well. We know, not only, as you will have seen in the written submission that I'm very grateful the members have, and Chair, that you have seen already, we know that not only that quality early learning has a 13% return on investment, is a massively important social equalizer, is a massively important mechanism of child safeguarding and protection, is also a very fundamental form of employment for many people in communities. But we also know that when we are not spending sufficiently on early childhood development, we're not only flying in the face of commitments that have been made by the executive in Parliament, in the National Integrated ECD framework, but we're also running a massive opportunity cost for every child that isn't given access to early learning opportunities, for every child that isn't given access to the protection and nutrition and health and safety programs that form part of a child's early childhood development rights. So we know from one of our sectoral partners, Ilifa Labantwana, that at current investment rates, universal access to ECD won't be achieved even by 2050. That's 20 years behind the government's targets. And the reason I mention this, particularly as part of the submission, is that when the MTBPS took place and the DoRAB came out with it, there were different expectations in the ECD sector about the extent to which government would commit to the additional funding, which we're all very aware is required for ECD. There were some discussions about whether that additional funding would extend to an increased ECD subsidy, whether it would instead increase to increased coverage of the subsidy. What very few of us were expecting was for ECD to be almost entirely absent from any discussion whatsoever in the MTBPS and in the DoRAB, particularly in light of frequent statements made by the executive and made by the DBE itself on the importance of ECD. And linked to that, of course, is the fact that, as I'm sure many members will be aware, the gender-responsive budgeting approach was supposed to be a part of this MTBPS as well and was entirely absent. We were told by Treasury that this is because the data they're relying on is not yet of a sufficient availability or sufficient quality, and they hope to include some short mini gender-responsive budget in February. But the point is that when we're speaking about vulnerable groups and vulnerable communities, and particularly about young children, we're not making a submission that there is some newfound evidence on the importance of protecting children, on the importance of educating children, and we don't purport to attempt to make that an object of discussion. We're aware that everyone in this house is aware of that importance, and that for a very large reason is why we understand the Bella Act was passed. Our concern is that despite Parliament having the ultimate responsibility and oversight for the funding requirements of our country, we are increasingly seeing a fiscal approach taken by Treasury that, whether intentionally or inadvertently, is very clearly undermining the ability of Parliament to pass useful, effective, implementable legislation. And so, although this has always been a requirement of Parliament and one that we are sure that this Council has always taken seriously and this committee has always taken seriously, we're at a particularly dangerous juncture where we are passing very well-known, prolific, important, significant legislation that is being undercut in its ability to be implemented by a department of government which is not ultimately responsible for funding in this country. Of course, as we know, it is Parliament. So I'm going to thank you very much, Chair, and from my section of the submissions. And if there's no sort of intermediary questions, then I'll hand over to my colleague.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Greetings, honourable members, and apologies for the slight delay in the beginning of our presentation. But I think Daniel outlined the crux of the presentation that we made today, is that Parliament has this duty to uphold the Constitution and the legislation that's passed, and Treasury through the DoRAB and MTBP has undermined this, and is particularly pressing in early childhood development and grade R through the Bella Bill that was acted. But that's not the only area in which education rights are being undermined, and we know the courts have ruled that education, unlike other socioeconomic rights, except I think food, it's an immediately realizable right. And that means that there's a heightened responsibility on government and on the legislature to ensure that it's realized. And some of the ways in which it's being undermined through the fiscal framework, through allocations to the provincial equitable share, and also through certain policies, I think it's important for us to highlight so that this committee can make recommendations and, when necessary, take action to amend or adjust the budget and certain legislation and policies that affect how public money is being spent. And so, Honourable Chair, you earlier mentioned, I think the phrase you used was a moral compact in South Africa where there's cross-subsidization. But what we're seeing in education, in certain aspects of education policy, is not a cross-subsidization from the rich to the poor, but from the poor to the rich. And it's particularly evident in the provisioning norms, which is the funding of publicly paid educators. So in the Western Cape, this is research from the World Bank, they say that schools which charge fees actually spend, high schools which charge fees, spend more on teachers than high schools that are no-fee schools. So that's all excluding school fees, right? This is the public money that goes to teachers in fee-charging schools is higher than the public money that goes to teachers, to wages, in no-fee schools. And this is in the Western Cape, and here are the figures. So 17,000 Rand per high school learner relative to poorer learners which get less resources. Another area where there's particular inequity relates to the provincial equitable share formula in general, but in the
So I just want to get clarity on that point, because you are not. It is not conflating the subsidization by student governing body fees into teacher salaries. That is not conflated.
Yeah.
You are saying as the state, we pay, if I get you correctly, teachers in no-fee schools lower than we do teachers in fee-paying schools.
Yes, this is correct for the Western Cape at least.
Okay.
It might be.
I just want to understand the point. No, I'm not arguing the point. I just want to get clarity.
Yes, it comes from a World Bank sector report done to the Western Cape Education Government. And the mechanisms through which this happens, I think there's two related ones. And it relates to, one is the post-provisioning norms, which is policy of the Department of National Basic Education done nationally. And that's, it only allocates a maximum of 5% of posts for redress, poverty redress purposes. And that's much too low given the extent of inequality. Of course, when you add SGB-funded school fees, this inequality increases dramatically as well. And then the other area of inequity relates to the provincial equitable share formula. We know 48% of this formula is and the education component, but the education component just looks at the number of learners per provinces. It doesn't adjust for the level of poverty that these learners experience. It doesn't adjust for the different sort of cost drivers in education in these provinces. We know like infrastructure is much more difficult to procure in a rural province than it would be in an urban province, for example. Delivering services for national school nutrition program, but also just general day-to-day costs vary amongst provinces in education in particular, and we think that the education component needs to be revised to reflect that. There's also so what happens is that you'll find, for example, Limpopo spends of all its discretional provincial equitable share funds, spends 51% of its funds to education. Western Cape, in comparison, spends 44%. And might I highlight that the provincial equitable share gives 48% of it is determined by the education component. So what should actually be happening is every province should fund it at 48%. But then when you look at maybe the outcomes, overcrowding or the average learner-educator ratio, this takes into account SGB posts, is higher in Limpopo than it is in the Western Cape, despite them spending more of their total money on education than the Western Cape does. But the other problem around this area is the discretionary aspect that provinces have about how much they allocate to education. I mentioned 48% of the total provincial equitable share is for education, but the Western Cape spends less than that, 44%. So there's a clear solution to the 2,407 contract posts that are being reduced in the Western Cape. It's simply that the province has not allocated the amount of money relative to other provinces that it could and that it should to education. And this would easily save those 2,400 teacher posts. But I must highlight that the funding crisis is still a national crisis. And that although the basket of posts is being reduced in the Western Cape, there's extremely high vacancy rates across other provinces. I think for 2022-23, Eastern Cape's registered a 27% vacancy rate, something like this, and there's thousands of posts. 2022-23 across the country, it was, I think, more than 60,000 unfunded vacancies in education departments. And this is devastating on the ground. Classes are extremely overcrowded, more than 60 learners in a class. Just learning is unable to happen. It's stress on teachers, it's stress on learners, psychosocial impacts, crime impacts, and the list goes on. The other area in which education rights are being undermined through insufficient funding would be water and sanitation. We know the problems of plain pit latrines that are still presently with us, despite the deadline having been many, many years ago. But progress is being made on this front at an achingly slow rate. We are worried that the school infrastructure backlogs grant and the CD program, which is a nationally funded program, is going to be merged with the education infrastructure grant, which is administered provincially. Just think that the committee should ensure that there's a lot of transparency and clarity about the reasons for this merger. I know it was touted previously, and I think the previous Appropriations Committee asked about this, and then that decision to merge the grants was then postponed and delayed because there wasn't sufficient transparency, clarity. It wasn't proven that merging the grants would be more effective in delivering services. So now that it's coming around again, we hope that there's a better plan, that it will be effective. But if there is not, there needs to be proper scrutiny about the reason for merging these two grants.
Just keep in mind the time.
Okay, sorry. Again, costs, estimated costs by the Department of Basic Education far exceed the funds given to school infrastructure. In fact, the school infrastructure, education infrastructure grant is seeing real decreases. It's not keeping up with inflation. And this is really concerning given the level of school infrastructure backlogs. So it's not just in water and sanitation, it's in classrooms, Another concerning grant that will be merged into the provincial equitable share is the community library services grant. I know Honourable Neil May mentioned that there were problems when speaking to Treasury in getting provinces to pay municipalities to keep libraries up. Without this ring-fence funding, we really worry about the state of libraries, and the norms and standards have been adjusted a bit as well. Before, every school was meant to have its own library. Now there's been a change, and sort of community libraries can serve in this function. But if there's no libraries in this area, 74% of schools don't have a library, we need this grant to have students access libraries and education in general, the right to education. So spoke a bit to the Western Cape teacher posts and unfunded vacancies. I think the other thing to realize is that in the MTBPS, they did give a breakdown of additions given to the wage bill. And we've compared this to the total addition in consolidated government spending, except for interest and the contingency reserve. So basically, the additions claimed to be going for wages have come from dramatic cuts in other expenditures. So the additions for next year that are supposed to go to wages exceed the total addition in the consolidated spending budget. So it's just unworkable, it's unfeasible to be cutting everything else to go to wages. There should be a joint increase in this. Otherwise, provinces will not be able to really fund this wage bill despite Treasury proclaiming that it's funded it, because there's a desperate need. So the exact, there's disputes between provinces and between Treasury, but we know that the condition on the ground is that there's simply not enough money, and there needs to be revisions to the provincial equitable share formula to fund both wages and non-personnel expenses. There was a special intervention on overcrowding in schools that was announced with the estimated cost by the DBE. It was meant to be funded. There were advanced discussions with Treasury, and then they pulled out due to cost containment measures. Again, Funza Lashaka bursary, there were cuts announced to this funding in the February budget. We think that adjustments should have been made given the teacher shortage to fund this more extensively and to train more teachers. Similarly, there's not real clarity around how the Presidential Youth Employment Initiative is going to continue, but we think, given the crisis in education, that the education component should be improved and should continue. DBE presented post-provisioning budget pressures just to keep the number of the learner-educator ratio, which we know is already not good enough, but just to keep it stable given increased learner enrollment. It's going to cost a lot, and none of this was adjusted for in the DoRAB. And then there's other issues. National School Nutrition Program conditional grant. It equates to less than 5 Rand per meal per learner. I looked at the prices of dog food. That comes to more than 5 Rand per meal, to be crude. And we know there's problems in the National School Nutrition Program. Just last week in Gauteng, I think in Katlehong, 110 learners, after eating SAMP from the program, this is not eating elsewhere, were hospitalized. But when learners are hungry, they're also going to look for other cheap sources of food, and we've seen the problems that are in the news lately, where many people are hospitalized after food poisoning. Learner teacher support material, there were cuts to funding for this program earlier in February, and now there's been a rollover. So that cost containment measure might have disrupted the provision of services. Scholar transport, there are huge significant funding shortfalls. We recommend introducing a conditional grant and a reform of the national policy to make sure that learners can get to schools. And then national norms and standards for school funding, also related to the provincial equitable share. Provinces and education departments are meant to give schools a particular subsidy. At least 2 provinces do not fund no-fee schools, non-personnel and non-capital budgets at the level prescribed by these norms and standards. So again, an example of policy being undermined by Treasury, and we think that adjustments need to be made to fix that. I'll end there. Thank you, honourable members.
I appreciate it, and I know I'm putting you under a bit of pressure, but I just want to make sure that you don't get robbed on the deliberations aspects of the issue. So that I don't want you to lose that point. And I did indicate the time. I gave you an additional referee's optional time over and above. We're going to go online and take the last presentation, then members will start to file questions. One last one. Yeah. I just indicated now to Mashile. There was a substantive document that I was looking through. It wasn't as pretty as the one that is before us. Good morning and welcome, Honourable Member. Can you hear us okay? Is it Dr. Majid or Dr. If you intro yourself from UKZN, you can proceed from there. Can you hear us?
I can hear you well. Thank you so much.
Welcome. You've got 20 minutes. You don't have to use all of it, but that's what you have.
Thank you so much, Chairperson, and thank you to the committee for allowing me the opportunity to present work that we've been doing since 2018. I was accompanied by my colleague, Dr. Nombuso Mate, but she's just been called out to a meeting. She will rejoin and take on part of the answering of questions and part of the presentation if she's back in time. I am Dr. Hasina Majid, a postdoctoral research fellow at UKZN School of Management and Public Administration. And the work that I'm presenting today is a collaboration with Dr. Nombuso Mate. She is she's the academic HOD and the chief specialist in KZN for ophthalmology services at UKZN School of Medicine. And we've also been joined and supported extensively by Professor Mogi Suban. Professor Mogi is a familiar name around finance. She's an academic and public finance expert, also at the School of Management, IT and Governance. The work that we wish to present today is around the impact the medium-term budget speech would have on eye health service delivery. And from COVID, we coined a very funny term. We always say, I'm covered by the person before me. And that's usually because we have online fatigue. But today, I'm genuinely covered by the people before me. And there's nothing that I can say that can add more than my colleagues in the discussions that have come before. In framing this discussion, I want to take 2 minutes to just go through an exercise. And you can have a pen in front of you, or paper in front of you, or just do it mentally. I want you to answer the following questions to yourself. Did you drive yourself to work today? Can you do your current job with the same functional abilities if you were blind? How many people in this room with us today are taking some form of chronic medication for diabetes, hypertension, cardiac, or any other chronic medication? On average, how many hours do you or your loved ones spend reading, writing, and using a screen of any kind? Do you use spectacles? If you take a look at the room around you, how many people in the room are wearing spectacles? How much did these spectacles set you back? And were you able to get them at a public care facility? And now that we have the answers to that, I'm quickly going to move on to where we're at in terms of eye health and why it's necessary for us to make this presentation to the committee. I'm not able to change the slides on my side unless I share this. I'll continue in the meantime while we get this going. If someone could move me to the second slide, please. 1 in 10 people in South Africa have some form of eye problems. Eye care is split into 2 parts. It's split into vision and eye health. Vision is how much we can see and how well we can see, and it's supported by interventions offered by your primary health providers that include optometrists and ophthalmic nurses. Eye health is a more complex area of work, and it's provided interchangeably between optometrists to a limiting level, ophthalmologists, general practitioners, nursing staff, and it depends on where people are located within the healthcare service stream. We are facing a pandemic of myopia. Myopia is best known as nearsightedness, more prevalent in children, but it's also starting to emerge in those of us that are using screen time and doing excessive near-point work for our daily functionality. And there are systemic gaps in how eye health currently operates in our country. We intended to bring this to Parliament a few times over the course of the last few years, and we felt that we didn't always have enough to show. And like the colleagues before me, the numbers, the budgets, the statistics, eye health doesn't have that. And that is a critical gap that we want to talk about today. The medium-term budget speech speaks about austerity measures, and our understanding of austerity measures is to tighten the belt, to be able to maximize the output with the little that we have and try and repurpose budgets for what is critically important. Eye care and eye health will never be deemed critically important, and it's not a local issue, it's a global issue. That's because there's no bleeding, it can't lead to immediate death, and blindness doesn't come with pain. So there's no pain, there's no urgency, there's no pressure on the system for anything that is urgent or immediate. The second issue that we have is that eye care services provided by optometry services and ophthalmology services are governed by 2 different policies in the country. They also have 2 different budgets. Where ophthalmology has been in the system for the longest amount of time, optometry has been a fairly new entrant. This new entry of optometry, and given the fact that there's no national directorate for eye care services, despite repeated calls through literature and other platforms over the years, has resulted in a data gap. And that means that monitoring and evaluation of the services that are being rendered in the few and disparate places that it's being offered is not documented anywhere enough for it to be taken back to a national level to influence decision-making by departments of health, by the finance minister, by treasury, or anybody else in a decision-making capacity for that matter. The second very limiting issue around how decisions are made regarding eye health and why it affects the budget is that in all of the time that eye care and eye health exists under decision-making mandates and on the agendas that it presents itself at local levels, at provincial levels, and sometimes at national level, decision makers around eye health and eye care are often people without any exposure directly to that field. And that's because the number of people that we have working in the field as clinicians is extremely low. In 2019-2020, we were told that there were 80 ophthalmologists serving the country in the public sector, and out of 4,500 optometrists, there were less than 250 serving the public sector. The majority of the eye health workforce of this country rests in the private sector, which is a highly monopolized sector. It's an extremely expensive sector. That presents in itself a crisis of equity and equality, and the current status of eye health that we're at right now has moved, in our opinion, beyond a crisis to a disaster, where we feel that it's starting to become important for us to talk about disaster risk reduction strategies and pulling it or underpinning it within the context of how finances are deployed towards this service delivery. When I ask you the questions to frame your mindset around why eye health should be discussed at this platform today, mobility, safety, productivity, and employability are directly linked to vision and eye health status in the country. The leading causes of blindness in our country at this point is uncorrected vision in children and in adults, in older people impairing their reading abilities, in younger children affecting their near or distance vision, where distance vision is more popular, and in the youth sector and in the employed sector, uncorrected vision leads to impairments that can cause significant damage, impacting directly on the fiscus. If you look at the amount of road traffic accidents as an example, there's no data at all telling us the status of eye health and its link to what happens, especially with night driving. There's a direct link between reduced vision in every person at night and how they are able to navigate themselves in dark spaces. Safety, physical safety is a direct concern. That's the safety of the individual and their safety in relation to their surroundings. Productivity, if we are to have this meeting with all our eyes closed, purely dependent on our hearing, as a first-time initiative, our concentration would dwindle. And that's because our brain would struggle to put what we're saying into perspective. The burden on the health system from poorly managed eye care budgets is not measured, and it should be measured, and this is creating a leaking bucket system of resources. And the reason we say that is because the health system is diverse and it has many avenues of funds and funding that is deployed towards managing and maintaining the health of the people and also the operations of the department. A critical example I wish to bring to the committee at this point is the issue of bursaries. Health departments, district health departments or provincial health departments year on year make bursaries available for people to study optometry. Optometry is run at 4 training schools in the country: University of Limpopo, University of Johannesburg, University of KwaZulu-Natal, and University of Free State. These students taken in year on year, with some of them being offered bursaries, exit directly into the private sector. And this is because even though there's a mandate nationally to take on optometrists in the public sector, provinces are autonomous in how they apply this. The budget is extremely restricted and eye health isn't a priority concern. What happens then is the money spent on bursaries for students that have now completed their studies is lost, never to be replaced back to the state, either in service or in any other form, because the graduates are then released from the department saying there's no space for you, please go on to take up employment in the private sector. This is critical. It's a loss of funds that could be directly deployed to the human resource crisis that we have facing our ophthalmology departments and our optometry departments. The second issue that we have in terms of bleeding of resources, the medium-term budget speaks about the national health insurance. It speaks about public-private partnerships. It looks at how it addresses health system challenges. Government at its different levels, provincially and at district level, has taken on decisions to make spectacles available to the public. Spectacles are being made available to the public on a tender process in some places, where thousands or millions of rands are going into tender processes, where spectacles are issued to people in the absence of a strengthened and capable public administration system. If you are a spectacle wearer, you know that every 2 years someone gives you a call or you get an SMS to notify you that you're due for your next set of spectacles. And that's because globally the accepted time frame for spectacles or lifespan of spectacles is 2 years. In the state system, for example, especially where we live in high violence societies, societies with high use of alcohol, high accidents, we have aging communities and high crime, spectacles are not lasting 2 years. In the absence of an administrative system that functions in a capable way, we can have one person accessing the same pair of spectacles at various sites, depleting the resources available on those tenders, on those budgets, and excluding somebody else from accessing a much needed device. That is another bleed to the system. In terms of public-private partnerships, government is losing out on ample opportunity to capacitate itself to be able to meet its cataract backlog targets. There is a capable civil society sector, and we know that the civil society sector is the third most important sector in our country at this point in time, especially given the inequity that we face and the great demand on services that are required. We have case studies of civil society organizations like Al Imdad Foundation, who has meaningful relationships with different provinces, departments of health, to be able to bring in a workforce from overseas of about 22 skilled workers, consumables for cataract surgery, and to be able to do high volume cataract camps over weekends where they clear between 100 and 500 people sitting with cataract backlog. There is no system at this point at any level of governance that has the capacity to standardize public-private partnerships for eye health. And this is what we turned into a PhD study before we took the leap to present to this committee. There's no standardized public-private partnership model. There's no standardized forums sitting for eye health at local level, at provincial level, at district level. There's no data collection. The data collection through the district health system is flawed. We've been called to meetings previously where we were told there's a backlog of like 600 cataracts. And we know that estimated in that place, you're sitting around 1,000 or 2,000. Hospitals at this point in time have such a weak public administration system and an administration system regarding patients awaiting surgery. You may go into a district level hospital and find that patients are recorded in a black book, pen to paper. You go into a next hospital, it's recorded in the diaries of the staff, and if those staff leave, the diaries leave with them, and you might find another hospital using a digital interface to be able to keep better track of the patients. Waiting lists start from as long as 12 months to about 5 years, and that's where it's measured. In those 5 years, people can relocate, and sadly, they can die blind. A critical issue that I wish to raise to the committee at this point is that having visual impairment and cataracts, which are the two reversible forms of blindness, directly affects the fiscus. And it affects the fiscus because it takes able-bodied, seeing people and transforms them into people living with disabilities dependent on others for their basic needs. We have found in places like the Eastern Cape, where people are living with blindness, one or more persons from their household can no longer take up employment opportunities or participate in the economy because they need to become full-time caregivers to the person with sight challenges. In addition to cataracts and visual impairment, which are the two reversible forms, glaucoma is an irreversible form of blindness which has a high prevalence in our country. And alongside that is diabetic retinopathy. As a country, we have done extremely well in our PHC re-engineering and making primary healthcare services available to the public. A direct effect of that is people are able to live healthier lives for longer. A side effect of long life and aging is having vision problems, starting with reading challenges, which limits how we take medication, to your long-term and blinding impacts of cataracts, diabetic retinopathy, and glaucoma. These can take people from being seen to being blind to the end of their life. In closing, what I wish to bring to the committee is that we know at this iHealth can have a more structured space in health service delivery. It's not even about asking for more funds. It's about repurposing the funds that are leaking through the system so that we can be able to come out with something that is impactful. And I think at a starting point, before we go to our wish list, which is now up on the screen, an advisory panel of some kind, if we were able to make some contributions on that level and start tightening up the gaps that we have, taking what we have and making the most of it, having a structured public-private partnership model, having a streamlined access to MOUs with the national or provincial departments, removing the red tape so that we can fast-track the services and get it working without further burdening the health system, but also in a way that stops us from being paralyzed as we are right now to act because of the red tape from a public administration and governance system. Thank you very much for listening to me, and if my colleague has joined, we will then answer together on the questions. Thank you so much, Chairperson. Thank you to the committee.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. We are going now. These are all the presentations that are for today. Honorable members, I think we'll pose some questions, noting that of the three presentations, they are not accounting to the committee so much as making recommendations. I allowed a number of questions to Salga because Salga equally has a dual function. We appropriate funding and the account. So that is one, but equally so, questions need to be directed towards clarity rather than accountability, if I could put it that way, as to how you see it going. So let me open the floor for questions from members and also to look if there are any members online. Honorable Wakelin, Neil May, Lekhanyane. Yeah, if we can be brief and aggressive as Honorable, as Mr. Makakula had already stated, people are paid, it's Friday. I'm only reflecting on previous minutes, honorable members. I'm not here to impugn your integrity. I'm just supporting Cosatu in this regard. Honorable Wakely.
Chair, if we stay a little bit longer, the money will last longer. Chair, just a few matters to the Cosatu representative. I first and foremost must just say I'm extremely concerned about the pension fund non-contributions. Let me upfront say that's why I raised it with Salga, and in the meantime I've engaged some of my colleagues. That list is not what it seems. There are some court disputes in there that needs to be dealt with. So it's not as crazy as it sounds, but it is a concern. My concern lies in here, Chair, is that, and I raised it, I think, about 2 weeks ago, where I raised the matter of appropriation to municipalities. These monies were covered. These employer fund contributions were covered as part of the regional budget, and now that it is used for operational expenditure, I think. I hope so. But it's, the point I want to make, I take note, and from our point of view, we will engage on the matter further. There's just one stick point for me around the presentation, and you're correct in saying the salary matter and the increase of salaries. There are two parts to it. The first one I want to say to you is that I was deeply involved in a matter that I think needs further investigation, Chair, and it's the matter of unions having loan agreements with the same employees, resulting in zero salaries take-home pays. It's a massive problem for us. I've seen it in many municipalities where you'll find a person, because he owes the union money from a loan agreement, and so it's a free, they create interest, and what happens is that municipalities become the collection agent, and it's like secured money for them. I really want us to engage on that matter. Then, just lastly, just trying to find that the presentation. We have been, let me get to the short point. We received a presentation from FFC on a matter of salary comparison with private industry. Currently, what we've got in front of us is that FFC is telling us that state employees earn 50% more to their counterparts in private sector. I would like to have your response on that so that we can have clarity, because And that research is done, and if you can tell us it's not true, tell us where you get your information from so that we can, because this is what we need. We need clarity on these issues because we get told many things. Then on the equal education, I take a note, and in actual fact, the point of the Bella Bill vis-a-vis the budget not talking to the Bella Bill, that matter we've raised succinctly in our last meeting. Actually, it was yesterday, the day before yesterday, very strongly. And how did the budget office miss that? And they're busy looking at that. However, I would like you to, that's why I need your presentation. Maybe if you can tell us, where did you get your information from, the amounts? I mean, you talk, I think, is it 17 billion in totality that you suggest? If you can give us some clarity on how did you get to that figure, because that is important for me to understand. I'll leave that at that, because I think it's important. The point you make is a clear point, and it's, we as a committee have taken note of that already to say, yeah, Bella Bill, you said this is, I think, and if I'm correct, it affects 200,000 ECD children, if I'm correct. And you're talking to the committee that supports and that will fight to the bitter end ECD. I mean, this is the committee you're talking to that will do that, as opposed to other things. But that, because it's an issue that is very close to our hearts. Just on the University KwaZulu-Natal, Chair, I would like to propose that some way that this committee direct formally this presentation to the Department of Health so that they can engage the Department of Health to some structured approach, and then come back when they need money or there is discussions around budget, it comes back to us. But fundamentally, I think this should land at the Department of Health, and let they have a formal contact point. Let us be the directing and let them connect with somebody, a warm body, not to somebody in the department, but a warm body. Thank you, Chair.
Honourable Nilme.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for all the presentations. And Chair, let's start with Cosatu. Cosatu, what is Cosatu's assessment of operational vulindlela? And one of the biggest challenges, as you mentioned, is high unemployment in South Africa, which you said is said to be slow structural reforms. What does government need to do to achieve successful structural reforms to grow the economy above 5% and reduce unemployment and poverty? And the other areas that I was looking at is, what is Cosatu's plans to assist workers in building the economy and government? Coming from myself as local government, we have all these demands, 13th check. What crippled my municipality, well, not crippled, so let me take that away. Looking at agreements that are made during strike challenges where governments are graded, local government is graded, upgraded. Workers are still waiting for job evaluations. It puts a lot of stress on the financial viability of those municipalities. And in fact, a lot of financial stress in that line. And then looking at overtime in local government. If you look at the overtime bills, because one is looking at money, that how are we looking at the budget, the division of revenue, money's going that way. At the same time, one needs to look at the system to say that how do you assist in fixing a system that will be able to use the money that they're getting to create jobs and grow the fiscus. Because if you're looking at 20% of the fiscus is going to debt repayment, okay, so that's historical. So is this budget not the best we could do under the circumstances? Because if 20% is going to fiscus, 60% to social, 20% to other. And this is the first time in the sense that we are not in a deficit, but at the same time, you know, we are losing skills. I mean, the Netherlands have been recruiting all our ITC staff, and that was a massive campaign recently where everybody that I knew in ITC was you know, applying to go to the Netherlands. So, under the current circumstances, I would have thought that the budget and the division of revenue and everything that we've done created a balance. Not everybody would be happy with what they were getting under the circumstances, but it was a balanced budget to a point that one could, you know, operate under these trying circumstances. The next questions I have on early childhood development. There's millions of rands flowing into the country for early child development. There are many, many NGOs that are given funding for that. Have you looked at how big that budget is? I can tell you, even from the Eastern Cape, that budget's huge into NGOs. And I'm wondering if government is not aware of that, because obviously that funding comes through with approval from government to early childhood development. And have you looked at what the private sector and grant funding and donor funding is actually giving to early childhood development? In local government, Municipal Health Services oversees early childhood development, and they also are in partnerships with NGOs. I would just say on that side, I think those were the questions that I had, is just that the early childhood development is a huge, huge funding, external funding envelope. The last presentation was, I had the same view that this should possibly go to even the Health Portfolio Committee and have a look at that. With regards, it was very educational, and I thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Kanya.
Chairperson, thank you so much, Cosatu. Maybe just to expand on the question that Honorable Nilmay has fielded here on the structural reforms. Are we slow on the implementation of the structural reforms, or are the structural reforms themselves inadequate? And if they are inadequate, what will entail a comprehensive introduction of structural reforms, apart from those that have been introduced already? Are they in other areas where we will need to do more? And then, Matthew, Mr. Matthew, if you would know, to what extent is the prevalence, and at what cost does it come, the pursuit of hopeless cases at local government, or yeah, maybe just to put it this way, where the authorities want to expel an employee from work, but they do not have a case against that employee. They are going to employ what they call a Stalingrad tactic. Stalingrad tactic, not the usual Stalingrad that we know, but Stalingrad in the sense that we are going to exhaust you financially given the length of period that it will take. You will succumb. And even if it takes us 3 or 4 years as government with this case, but because we have money to pay the lawyers, we are going to do that for as long as we can keep you out of the service. What is the prevalence of such practices? If you would know, if you may not know, maybe you can go and investigate, and next time you fill us. And across all the municipalities in the country. Chair, I must say this because one of the things that does not make local government work, especially in political parties which hold regular conferences. My man is elected the chairperson, he becomes a mayor. 2 years down the line, Wakeling becomes the chairperson, then he replaces my and you can imagine if the municipalities that we were asking Salga about, where you have a revolving door, trying to had 5 mayors in a very short space of time. You can imagine if each and every mayor wants to come with his or her own administration. That's where Stalingrad comes in. And at what extent does that impact on the financial viability of the municipality, but even the escalation of costs thereof. The FFC and the Parliamentary Budget Office, we asked them about a concept that is called labor market rigidity. If you can intimate with us on that concept, what labor market rigidity is. And then to equal education, the reality that we face. I worked in the Department of Education with the minister the last 2 years before I came here. The reality that we face is that government is not going to be able to fund ECD the way that is desirous. It's not going to be possible. And now, even when ECD was at social development, I don't think that it was adequately funded. Shifting the function to education meant that we are now introducing professionalization of ECD. We want to pay more premium into the cognitive development of the South African children, and maybe in foresight, looking to what we call the creation of a global citizen as it is envisaged in the National Development Plan. So with this dilemma in mind, what then becomes, or in your understanding, the alternative or alternatives to what is currently happening? In the meantime, when government is not able to fund ECD adequately, does everything come to a stop? So no. Out of 100 learners, we will take 10, and the other 90 must stay at home until we are able to. Yeah, does that enhances human development? Does it help us as a country to move forward the way we would have desired to? And yeah, what then becomes other alternative ways in which we can make sure that every South African children have access to education at a foundation phase, which is very, very critical for the development of a learning child. And then I will move to the University of KwaZulu-Natal, Professor Majid. This is a very, very enlightening and empowering presentation. And these are some of the things that ordinarily the topics we never talk about. We shy away from talking about topics like this because you always get worried when you are told about the defects or the infirms that accompany old age. But I would, Chair, be interested to know the extent of advocacy and awareness. Apart from presenting to us, for sure, I know that the university also has a responsibility or obligations towards the immediate communities that lie in its surrounding. To what extent is the university engaged in advocacy programs, in awareness programs, so that, yeah, my understanding is that primary health care is the foundation. Primary health care, what do they say? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. If we do advocacy, we embark in an awareness campaign, are there any returns, Professor Majid? What is it that we stand to gain? The things that you say in your presentation, for instance, if they do not appear in the APP of the Department of Health now, it does not mean that there is no damage that is being caused. But, and we cannot even say the department is ignorant to eye health. Maybe we may find a polite way to say it that maybe something they have never thought about, but it happens. And so, as a university, what are we doing in that field? Thank you so much, Chairperson.
Thank you. I'm going to just in prompting, if we allow a few minutes just to respond. Except my questions, perhaps maybe to Mr. Parks, the nature of the fiscal, the MTBPS has budgeted a 4.5% increase in labor over the medium term. Yet, I might be wrong, but I was watching the news yesterday, and one of your affiliates stated categorically that they've landed at 7% and are not moving. So I want to understand who funds the 3%. As a question of conversation. You state that in real terms, as far as our analysis is concerned, cost of employees is sitting at 38%. So effectively, for every R1 that is put in the budget, 22 cents of it goes towards debt repayment, and 38 cents of it goes to cost of employees. Now, you are making the point that it's stagnant from 94, in fact, in decline. I might ask the question whether is there not an asymmetrical view where if you are lower down as an employee, you get paid less, and the higher you go in the department, you get paid more, but there's an asymmetrical relationship in productivity? Because I take your point about vacancies, and vacancies are generally prevalent in frontline services, healthcare services, all of that. They are certainly not in director generals and deputy director generals and the chief director for stapling and the chief director for filing and all of the nebulous positions that seem to exist in government. There's a book that is called, I don't want to be ruled unparliamentary, but it's called BS Jobs. And it's an interesting book because it looks at the infrastructure of the state and how we create jobs for things that in certain instances can be dealt with. Have you looked at the question of, is your view that we need to not rationalize, but we need to increase headcount? So because you stated the 1,000,094 question to the 2024 question. And then, equal education, we could preach all day. This is a subject I'm deeply passionate about because I think that, as I said to you in the break, we are inventing a new apartheid. We don't have to pass the laws, but so long as we educate our kids in the manner that they are, we are going to achieve a similar effect. In that, to quote Verwoerd, townships will genuinely become dormitories of unemployment. Or if you like, we are inventing labor sending sectors in rural areas just by miseducating our kids. That's all we are doing. So it is a genuine concern for me. So I accept your presentation. I'm not going to reiterate the question of ECD centers. There's 200,000 children that need to be incorporated into the ECD sector. So the prevailing figure that everyone plays around with is 8 billion rands to try and meet the fiscal obligation. And so I'm comforted to know that that's the question that we need to present. Where it sits for you, as far as other sectors, I'm not convinced about the argument that says that we will automatically cut teachers is politically sellable, but it isn't always such, because how you allocate budgets. So what I'd like to get your view, which I'll take in the presentation, is what other services are being cut. Gauteng are experiencing a similar cut. They didn't go for teachers first, they went for other programs. So I accept when the Western Cape stood up and said it was teachers, it does raise the flag, but it doesn't always mean that when you cut your pie, that's where you start, always. And then I will reserve my comments for the UKZN, given the recommendation from the committee that perhaps maybe health might begin there, because you might also discover there are already appropriations given towards attending to that, and you might argue differently, but I think I would rather them deal with it before we come back here in that regard. Let me give you a few minutes. Please, let's stick to a few minutes. You don't have to represent in that sense. Otherwise, I will call us a committee strike, Mr. Parks, and then we have tools down.
Sure. What's our time limit, Chairperson? 5. Okay, cool.
Or less than that.
No, thanks, Chair members. Look, on the pension fund issue, so the report we've shared with you was from the FFCA from 2023. When we talked to them this week, they said they're coming with a new report within the next 2 weeks or so. Hopefully things look better. So when we get it, we'll share it with colleagues. It's a very long report, 4,000 employees. I can share that with you as well. I just lifted municipalities because of DoRAB. But others, corporates tend to be security companies and cleaning companies. Municipalities seem to like also joining this Olympics of pickpocketing workers. But I think it's a ticking time bomb, because one can imagine if a worker wants to go to retirement and he finds her employer hasn't paid, I can imagine that worker will not be happy, and it won't be a happy conversation with the employer. But we've had some engagements, Chair, at NEDLEC on this issue, with Treasury, with the Department of Labour, with ASISA, FFCA, because we all want to see it being resolved. So we've basically got 3 immediate interventions. One is that we're looking at amending the BCA, so that when the employer is in default, he must pay you the money plus interest. To strengthen the law. We're also looking at the Minister of Labour empowering labour inspectors to also check compliance with pension fund contributions, because right now they just check labour law compliance. The Minister of Labour also looking at having, through the presidential promise stimulus, hiring about 20,000 labour inspectors over the MTEF period. Currently it's about just under 2,000 labour inspectors. That also could help as well. But it's a ticking time bomb, Chair, and the 2-part pension reforms is nice, because now workers or police employers in this regard, because before people just assumed it's being paid. The loan agreements, Chair, we're also quite worried on that issue. And at times we've seen, look, unions have the same demons of corruption that the rest of society has. Churches, political parties, government. Well, no one is exempt. So it is a worrying issue. We had an engagement with the Reserve Bank yesterday at NEDLEC about some proposals on their side about trying to manage this issue of payroll deductions being abused by loan sharks, all sorts of things. I think we've all have seen the amount of criminality taking place. Often they might even bribe an HR salary payroll person So it's an issue. I think we've agreed with the Reserve Bank. Let's have some more discussions as Labour, as business, by Christmas to get done with a new intervention. But it's going to take a lot of work. There's also a worrying thing, Chair, that the Fifth Parliament amended the National Credit Act to try to prevent some abuses, and that hasn't been implemented yet by DTIC. 7 years later, I know the Portfolio Committee is trying to intervene on it. Chair, I'll come to the wage bill issues last because there was a few questions there. On Operation Vulindlela and structural reforms, look, I think we must commend government. ESCOM has seen a huge turnaround. A year ago, January, it was 12 hours of load shedding. We've not had it for 6 months. Not out of the woods yet, and the municipal debt owed to ESCOM, which is rising, is a scary thing. We have seen some progress at Transnet too. November, December last year, it was scary, the issue of Transnet. There's some progress. We think more needs to be done quickly. Because, Chair, if there's one thing we can do to grow the economy is to fix Transnet. That'll add 1% to the economy from mining, manufacturing, agriculture. The 55 billion rand revenue shortfall we had last year in the MTBBS, half of that was the issue of Transnet, the mining industry, etc. So we're curious about and hopeful about the Operation Vulindlela's interventions in local government. We need to see what does that entail. But if there's a way to fix local government, we should support it. We do need to see more support being given to ESCOM Transnet, also to Metro Rail too, which has a huge impact on the urban economy. But I think, what do we want to see being done? Well, reinforce those 3 key SOEs. The other SOEs too, but these are the 3 big boys or big girls. Local government too. But I think our approach is really that you have to stimulate the economy when it's fragile, when it's stagnant. You can't expect improvements if you're sitting at 1% GDP growth. Whether it's 1%, 1.2, it's neither here nor there. And even the jobs we gained in the last quarter, that 300,000 jobs, we might lose those jobs come next year. So first is about growing the economy, ensuring the infrastructure allocation, that 943 billion rand is spent. And again, that's ESCOM, Transnet, Metro, and municipalities. Fixing frontline services. So, Chair, for us, if you fix home affairs, it benefits workers. They don't need to queue for 6 days, lose 6 days of wages. It benefits the company where they work because there's less disruption to productivity. We've been dismayed, Chair, how government has cut the presidential promise stimulus from 36 billion rand to 3 billion rand over the last 2 years. It's not perfect, but it's helped young people earn a salary, gain skills, experience to find employment. We should be reversing that. Look, government can't do everything, so the private sector, the banks also need to play the role. Can they make credit more affordable, accessible for SMMEs? Maybe we need a new loan guarantee scheme, which is better than the previous one. Of course, tackling fiscal leakages, etc. I don't want to lecture this education caucus, but fixing education, fixing the skills. I mean, you'll be amazed, Chair, that in the SETAs, the amount of wastage there, corruption, under expenditure. One SETA alone didn't spend 600 million rand in a single year. Yet businesses, workers are crying for the skills, and the money is available. Chair, I think one issue also is that people say, where do you get all this money from your shopping list of demands? And we think SARS have done a wonderful job. We should be writing SARS a blank check, because if they can boost tax compliance, every 1% tax compliance they get is an extra 20 billion rand to the fiscus of just existing taxes, not new taxes. And Kisvet and his team have done good work. They filled vacancies, they've invested in capacity, they've removed criminal elements. So ESCOM and SARS, they show you the model to fix the state. So Chair, I must gallop, because I know I'm cutting close to your 5 minutes.
You cut
past it. So negotiate.
So I'm skilled at negotiating.
I can see your eyes are looking at me. Let me gallop, Chair. But I'll also put in writing as well for members. Look, I think for us, on the debt service issue, we agree the debt must be managed. A decade ago, it was 23% of GDP. Today, it's 75%. But it's just how do you grow the economy to generate the taxes? I think for us, that's the fundamental issue. Cutting the wage bill, cutting public services, it's a death spiral, for lack of a better term. I think, Honourable Lekhanyane, I'll get more information, but what we can see, some municipal employees are being victimized because they blow the whistle on corruption. We saw Samu shop stewards in Vembe assassinated. ANC council was murdered for blowing the VBS whistle. We've seen other areas too, whether it's in Newcastle, Tshwane, Joburg, and I think it points to the coalition chaos. Chair, there is some discussions around some framework for coalitions. We've seen a few bills from COGTA, from the DA, We've also made our own submissions as well. We do now have a discussion about making sure that municipalities employ skilled people. You have utilities directors who have no engineering background, and then you wonder why they struggle. Labour market rigidity, Chair, we think is a bit of a red myth, a red herring. So people say it's difficult to fire, but in COVID, 2.2 million workers were dismissed overnight. So you can fire people if you want to. We're just saying comply. But the labour laws, it's about working in a safe environment, it's about maternity leave. We don't think those irritate an employer. The issue is about fixing electricity, fixing transit, fixing metro rail, the real issues. But we are having discussions here, and I'll put all of this in writing, some galloping, on about the labour law reforms in a win-win way. We hope we can find each other. I think lastly, Chair, on the wage bill, I think I must put all of this in writing because it's about 10 questions members gave us. Look, I think, Chair, we're not blind to the fiscal pressures. And I think, one issue that messed up the whole debate of collective bargaining is how in 2020, Treasury imposed a wage freeze. It poisoned collective bargaining because if they had come to engage with workers on a solution, we could have found. It's been done before. In the Madiba administration, the GPF contribution was lowered from 15 to 13% to ease the pressure on the fiscus. But if you don't engage, it poisons the waters. But I think our point, Chair, is that, look, the headcount has basically declined in terms of ratio to population, teachers to learners, nurses to patients. So there is an impact upon quality. You do find one nurse doing 3 nurses' jobs. Yeah, she's going to struggle. I think also the other issue is that the wage bill from the Treasury stats has declined from 35 to 31% of the budget. So that's an issue. To our members, Waking's question is that it's difficult to compare public sector to private sector. Public sector doesn't employ 1 million farm workers, 1 million domestic workers, doesn't employ mine workers. What it does employ is doctors, teachers, nurses, police officers, defence force personnel. Private sector doesn't employ defence force personnel. But if you compare apples to apples of doctors to doctors, teachers to teachers, nurses to nurses, you'll find you get paid better in the private sector, you get paid better in New Zealand or Qatar. So the danger of squeezing the already frustrated nurse is that she will go to a job in the private sector. There's no queues there. She'll go to Qatar, get paid in dollars or whatever, don't pay tax. So there's a consequence. But I think lastly, Chase, I know I've abused your generous hospitality significantly. We'll put this in writing. But we think if you fix the state, there's a benefit to the economy. Efficient healthcare, efficient education, it benefits businesses. And like with SARS or ESCOM, yes, you will spend money today, but what you're going to recover afterwards in growth and the taxes will be far greater. We're not saying that just print money, Chair, but we think there's a smart way and there's a reckless way to do it. I know, Chair, I've abused you, so I'll put all of this in writing, and thanks to Chair and members.
Thank you. I won't let you do it anymore. Let me give you guys 5 minutes, please. Let's take it, or there'll be a walkout here.
Great, thank you so much. Yes, I promise we will stick to it. I think the questions are very, very helpful, but I think that they're fair.
Can you switch your microphone on? We have to record this for posterity.
Now it's on. Thank you very much. Just to say, as I've mentioned, the questions from the members are very helpful. I think the benefit we have for time purposes is that there are somewhat straightforward answers to most of them, thankfully. So the first question from the Honourable Member on the sources for the figures for the 17 billion. So those two specific figures, the 12 and the 5 billion, come from the memorandum on the objectives of the Bella Bill. So those will be, and again, huge apologies for us not having the nicer presentation here, but we will make sure it is, and that reflects the sources. But if you would like to sort of take a look at that at some stage for the specific sources, it's paragraph 4 of the objective to of the memo to the Bella Bill. It's also being confirmed with somewhat slightly different breakdowns of figures, but that massive shortfall is being confirmed by the DBE in its portfolio committee meeting on the 15th of October, as far as I understand. To the question from the Honourable Member about the presence or the sort of the distribution of funds, particularly when it comes to external funding and public and private sector funding. So you're 100% correct, obviously, and in part that's because of the funding shortfalls, and also in part because of, I think, the recognition of how important ECD is. What I would like to perhaps emphasize, which I don't think I took the opportunity to do when I was speaking earlier, is that it's actually, in South Africa at least, neither the private nor the public sector which are carrying the majority of the cost burden for ECD. It's parents and caregivers themselves. So they're of the funding that's available, or the funding burdens. About 14 billion rand of that is carried by parents and caregivers, particularly with regards to payment for fees, also additionally for transport, things like that. And again, I'm really sorry that we didn't get to study the presentation beforehand, but there is a section on that. So when we compare that to the few billion from government, and I'm not from the part of the sector that's related to grants, so I don't want to lie and give you an exact figure for the private sector, but it's generally estimated to be in sort of closer to the range of the government expenditure, but less, obviously. Both of those together don't come even close to the amount of money that's being spent by parents and caregivers. And what's of particular concern is that because the overwhelming majority of ECD centres in South Africa charge fees, even if they're nominal fees, a huge number of parents who are carrying that burden are using their child support grants to pay for those fees. And in many cases, and this is information that's better held by organizations like Elitha Labantwana and DGMT, but in many cases, parents are spending about half of their child support grant every month just on the fees for the centres. So you're totally correct. I think the crucial issue here, though, is that even with the current government expenditure and private sector funding combined, it doesn't really come close. And then lastly, just from my side, to answer the question from the honourable member about alternatives, where it comes to what we're able to do presently for ECD. So I don't think I would be well placed, and I don't think it's our intention to have a long discussion here about the exact level at which we need to be implementing, especially because I fully appreciate that this is a standing committee that's very appreciative of the right to ECD. I think what we can certainly conclude is that whether we're able to achieve at 100% of the target, we certainly have enough funding to be achieving a lot more than we currently are. And so, there are different models, levels of ECD subsidies, for example, that would allow for children to be adequately protected in ECD centres. The upper band for truly inclusive, equitable education, and I can't remember the exact figure, but it's around 92 Rand per child, is nowhere near, obviously, the current 17 Rand subsidy that's been frozen for years now. But we know that even a sort of a moderate increase from that would make significant changes in the lives of children, and it would make significant changes in their ability to access their education. So, of course, we can't present comprehensive answers and solutions here, but there is certainly funding in the fiscus, especially in light of what some of the other people in this committee have mentioned about Treasury's approach to their exclusive approach, essentially, to reducing fiscal expenditure, where there is the potential to potentially raise more funding. There is a lot that we can still be doing that is entirely absent. And the last thing is to recognize that ECD is often discussed as a priority, which of course it is, but it also carries a massive opportunity cost in not being implemented. And so when we're weighing the ability for us to afford it, I think we often need to be pressing, more importantly, the whether we can afford not to protect children's rights to education, and we don't think that we can. Sorry.
No, you can't do 5 minutes and then give your colleague another 5 minutes.
In my head, I already thought that it was 3. I'm very sorry, Chair.
No.
No, sorry, Chair. I'll be very quick. I think there's just one thing left outstanding.
My apologies.
Which was your question on the wage bill and where provinces decide to cut. How do they choose? And so I think the Department of Basic Education does issue some sort of guideline where they say 80% of your discretionary funding from the equitable share should be spent on compensation of employees. And across the country, most provinces are spending more than that. It's 88, 95%. And this is just because budgetary pressures are so extreme and the needs are so vast, because there still aren't enough teachers even with that spending. I think Western Cape is spending the least on its wage bill relative to other provinces, but it's still hitting 80%. So it is a bad idea to cut in the first place, but there must be a mechanism of oversight to say how provinces are spending their money. The line of command isn't clear because there's the Department of Basic Education, but there's also the provincial premier, and so provinces are often they're ultimately accountable to the premier, but not to the education, and then you don't see outcomes. And then I think this committee then may need to intervene as well to say if there's spending involved, we need to have clear lines of transparency and accountability of how that spending happens. And then, but yeah, ultimately, because other provinces, and I raised it, they'll claim there's budget apparently for teachers, but there's chronic unfilled vacancies. So the Western Cape have cut their posts, the basket of posts, but their average number of unfilled vacancies, or the average vacancy rate, I think, is about 2% across a number of years. Whereas in many other provinces, like in KwaZulu-Natal, averages around 10% for the past 6 years. In the Eastern Cape, last 22.
Now you are adding.
Sorry, it was 27%. So there needs to be just a higher level of oversight and control over how provinces are making these decisions to save teachers and to save frontline services.
Thank you. To the University of KZN, I mean, I think the only question was about reference, and I think the committee will resolve to take that position. I don't know if you've got a minute of input to put on the table. I'm not sure if you're still online.
Yes, good afternoon, Chair. It's two things that were raised by one of the members in the House around advocacy and the role of the university in advocacy. So whilst we may have a role and as well as a shared responsibility in terms of service delivery, but we don't really have a well-recognized advisory role at the provincial leadership structures. And I think that's one big gap. So we may have some ideas around how we can mitigate some of the things that were raised today, but we don't have an opportunity to really have an impactful influence on that. And I think the member also touched on issues around preventative measures and screening. And this is another gap as well, in that when looking at eye care, there isn't a budget allocation for screening and for secondary preventative measures, which are significant in terms of eye care and understanding that a lot of the diseases that do cause blindness are non-communicable diseases, so they can be screened early and addressed early. And so this is a significant gap. And looking as well at the fact that in terms of disability in the country, eyesight-related disability is leading in terms of disabilities at around 10%, but our budget allocations across the board did not speak to this in terms of addressing or reducing disability, as well as in terms of rehabilitative services as well. So these are all things that are really lacking in terms of the eye care space. Thank you. Thank you.
If it's permissible to you, we will, as a committee, write back to you with, if I can, Mashila and the Secretariat, liaise with the with the Portfolio Committee on Health and make sure there's a connection between those two, that chairperson and the presentation, and make sure there can be a follow-up in that regard. Can we do that? That would be first prize.
We would appreciate that very much. We would appreciate that very much, Chair. Thank you.
In my previous life, I used to marry people, so I take that job seriously. No, but let me first of all thank Cosatu, thank Equal Education and Partner, and obviously the University and Salga who are here for the presentations today. I mean, make no mistake, I mean, they are substantive. So once we come from here, just as a process going forward, the committee will consolidate the inputs, task the report. Budget votes are taking place on the 5th of December. So just so you know where the line there is, and then of course and naturally, which is important, that the budget for the 2025-2026 will be tabled in February 2020, whatever. So just so you are aware of the fact that this is part of the adjustment period and reflecting on the previous priority, that when we go into a new priority phase, that will be expressed based in February, and then we will between then and June, for it's about 4 months in that process, have broader engagements about the new priorities. So just so you know, as a framework goes from there. But thank you, honourable members. Let me wish you a very happy Friday. It is, we have a session on Tuesday, yeah?
Yeah, just a question, Chair, on next week on the committee, because it's committee. The commitment I've got now, the feedback is that both Tuesday and Wednesday is fine.
Yes, correct, yes. Yeah. I think we have the Ministry of Transport on Tuesday on the GFIB conversation. Yeah. I know you've got a plan. Yeah, no. 100%. Honorable Neil May, you know, our relationship is hard, you and I. So, but I want to thank members for being here. Let me wish you a very good weekend and happy Friday, Mr. Makakula. Enjoy your time.